Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back. In Module 11, we will talk about municipal social services, and in Lecture 51, we will introduce municipal social services. The different concepts that we will cover are on the different municipal social services, sustainable development goals, and the 17 and we will talk in detail about the 17 sustainable development goals. Then we will talk about role of ULBs in implementing this particular goals, and also aligning of sustainable development goals with the duties and responsibilities as listed in the 12th schedule. So, when we talk about municipal social services, of course, the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, which was or otherwise known as the Nagarpalika Act, this comes into the front. For example, after this act, ULBs were made the third tier of the government, and they were given the power to execute they were given several responsibilities and the power to execute these particular responsibilities. And ULBs can elect their own, has their own system of election, so that, and they can also take their own decisions. So these are their own democratic units of self-government, you can say. And all these responsibilities that comes along with this particular power are listed in the 12th schedule. And we have discussed this in detail earlier. For example, there are 18 responsibilities in particular. We have talked about urban planning, including town planning, roads and bridges construction, regulation of land use, slum improvement, prevention of cruelty to animals like cattle pounds, regulation of slaughterhouses. So these are a group of responsibilities. Similarly, there are responsibilities in regards to public health, sanitation, solid waste management, and so on, such as water supply for domestic, industrial and commercial purposes, public health, sanitation, solid waste management, vital statistics including registration of births and deaths. So these are some of the duties also that has to be taken up by the municipalities. Now, in addition to that, there are another aspects like provision of urban forestry, protection of the environment, promotion of ecological aspects, or provision of urban amenities and facilities such as parks, gardens, playgrounds, then street lighting, parking lots, bus stops, burial grounds, cremation grounds. So all this we will discuss in the next modules. Whereas in this particular module, we are more focused on urban poverty alleviation, planning for economical and social development, promotion of cultural, educational and aesthetic aspects, and particularly we focus on educational part, and safeguarding interest of weaker section of society, including handicapped and mentally retarded. So more or less, this is the part which we will focus in this particular module, and these are the different responsibilities which have been given to the ULBs, and ULBs has to conduct different programs. It has to provide certain services, or it has to create infrastructure and facilities so that this sort of activities could be, or this sort of services could be provided. Now, parallelly, when we talk about the 12th schedule or the responsibilities of the urban local bodies, at the same point of time, at the global level, the Sustainable Development Goals were formulated. This were formulated by at the United Nations General Assembly, and all the member countries have signed or signatories to it, and that means that all countries such as India has to also adopt these particular goals or has to follow these particular goals, right? And this is in regards to creation of a global development framework, so that overall the people or the entire society evolves or develops at the world level. So this particular development agenda, you can say that this 2030 agenda for sustainable development. So this actually talks about a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people on the planet for now and into the future. So that's the goal of creating this 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and this has been formally articulated and adopted in the UNGA resolution. So this was taken up in the 2033 agenda for sustainable development, and particularly this was a transition from the Millennium Development Goals, which was set in Agenda 21, and this has now in 2015 this actually was the timeline for this Millennium Development Goals ended, and then we moved. So this new Sustainable Development Goals were adopted, and this was adopted in the UN Sustainable Development Summit in 2015. Now, the overall 17 Sustainable Development Goals, as you can understand, we have got different targets that has to be reached, but in general, it talks about eradication of poverty and other deficiencies of the people, and of course, this cannot be overcome without improvement of health and education, and reduction of overall inequality in the society and between countries as well, and finally towards economic growth, but responsible economic growth considering climate change and preservation of oceans and forests. So this is the overall target or aim of the development framework, development for the entire world. Now, all these 17 goals, we will come to that later. These are interconnected environmental, social and economic aspects, all leading towards sustainable development. So that means even though there are 17 separate goals or specific targets, or targets you can say, then along with that, some of these are interconnected, and like if you improve one, the other will automatically improve. So, or sometimes these are also there has to be certain trade-offs as well. So this is so they are interconnected, so they are related with each other, but at the same point of time, these are specific goals that also has to be considered. Now, each of these goals has got around 8 to 12 specific targets. Now, we have 17 goals, and each goal has got around 8 to 12 specific targets or certain things that has to be attained. And for each target, how do you measure that the target has been attained? For that, we have got indicators or some parameters or some variables, you can say. We have to measure them or we have to monitor them and determine, are those parameters improving, or those variables, the value of those variables are improving or not. And each target has got 1 to 4 indicators which tell us if we are really attaining the target or not. And this is indicators are there to measure the overall progress towards the goals. Now, more or less the overall motto is to leave no one behind, but as you can understand that we have got 17 goals, and to give you an example, we will talk about the goal number 4, which is Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is quality to provision of quality education. Now, the overall statement for this goal is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So, this is a very broad goal. That is, it has to be inclusive, equitable, quality education, and also promote lifelong learning opportunities so that nobody is denied education at all. So, this is a broad statement, but it has to be again broken down into several targets. So, there are 10 targets and it is measured using 11 indicators. So, out of these 10 targets, there are 7 outcome oriented targets. That is what we have to attain, what circumstances we have to reach at the end of the period or at the end of this particular agenda period, which is 2030 for some goals, but for some goals it could be even continuous. Now, what are the 7 outcome oriented targets? These are free primary and secondary education. It has to be provided to everybody. Equal access to quality pre-primary education. This is pre-primary. This was primary, secondary, and this is pre-primary. Affordable technical, vocational and higher education. So, it is affordable, it has to be technical, vocational and also higher education. Increased number of people with relevant skills for financial success so that they can actually make money after studying, and elimination of all discrimination in education. So, that means giving opportunities to everybody. universal literacy and numeracy, so people who are already aged, or so that everyone in society can have basic literacy and numeracy, that means basic math skills, and education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So these are the 7 outcome oriented targets, that is what we want to achieve, whereas there are 3 more additional targets which are also known as means for achievable targets. All the sustainable development goals that has been designed, each has got these 2 kinds of targets. One is based on what would be the final outcome, and the other is intermediate, how to measure some intermediate improvements, that is for means of achieving targets. For in this case, for Sustainable Development 4, this means of achieving targets are build and upgrade inclusive and safe schools. So maybe at certain intervals you can measure this and say that okay, so many schools have been already done. Expand higher education scholarship for developing countries and increase the supply of qualified teachers in developing countries. So that means creating new posts for teaching, or filling up existing posts, or making sure the people who are going to teach are adequately skilled. So that is the goal of this particular. That is what this target is all about. Now, looking at the 17 targets in general, we can see that SDG 1 is no poverty. The target, it is, to say it talks about there should be no poverty, that is end poverty in all forms everywhere. SDG 2 is zero hunger, that is end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Good health and well-being, so which talks about ensuring healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. That means we have to think about the elderly, we have to think about the the neonatal the different stages of very young child to at different adolescence and at different stages of growth. Provision of quality education, gender equality. So that means we have to empower all our women and girls particularly. Clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, and which talks about promoting sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. So that means if I cannot create jobs, obviously we will not create economic growth. So one is to achieve inclusive and sustainable economic growth, we have to make sure people are adequately trained, adequately skilled, so that they get their employment. Then industry, innovation and infrastructure, where we are focusing on building resilient infrastructure to promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovations. And reduced inequality, where we should reduce the overall income inequality within and among countries. Now, SDG 11 talks about sustainable cities and communities in general. Then it talks about SDG 12 is about responsible consumption and production. So as you can see that if I go to the previous slide, many of these themes that we are discussing, many of these targets are cross-cutting issues with synergies between the goals, whereas others there has to be trade-offs between the goals. For example, if I want affordable and clean energy, or if I want clean water and sanitation, maybe I have to compromise on certain other things. Or if I want a lot of economic growth, then I have to compromise on other things. So there is sometimes a trade-off between the goals. And at the same point of time, there are a lot of synergies as well. That means certain things, if I want to improve this employment, in that case, of course, it will reduce poverty, it will reduce hunger. So so there are a lot of cross-cutting issues. That means if I provide skills to the people to get jobs, automatically it will take care of poverty, hunger, as well as it will improve industrial innovation. It will provide decent work and economic growth. So there are a lot of cross-cutting issues, but at the same point of time, there are also trade-offs that has to be considered between these different goals. So then coming to climate action, like if I want to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact by regulating emissions and promoting development in renewable energy, automatically my economic growth may be hampered, right? So this is where some kind of trade-off has to be done. That means we cannot have the best of both. We have to find a compromise between both the targets. Then, in addition to climate action, we have to conserve our environment, which is covered in these two goals, which is life below water and life on land. We have to conserve and sustainably use oceans, seas and marine resources, whereas we have to also promote and restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem and manage forest desertification and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss and so on. So these are the two things which could be related with climate action to a certain extent as well. Then overall, we want peace, justice and strong institutions. These are general goals. We should strive to achieve that. And we have to also look into partnerships for goals, where we have to strengthen the means of implementing all these targets, and we have to revitalize global partnerships for sustainable development. So these are the 17 SDG goals which are adopted by all the member countries, and we as a signatory to this particular resolution, UNGA resolution, we are also bound to follow all or try to achieve these particular goals within the listed timeline, that is 2030, and in some cases it could be extended, but that's what the target is. Now, there are also lot of critique about these sustainable development goals. Some people say that there are too many goals which have been adopted in this particular agenda. There is one of the goal is climate action, that means we are putting less stress on the environmental sustainability. So we are looking into all the other aspects, and because there are so much trade-offs that has to be there, maybe this the environmental goals should suffer. And finally, there are a lot of qualitative indicators are used to measure the final targets in addition to quantitative indicators. And as you know, that qualitative indicators are difficult to measure, and also it is difficult to track or monitor as well. So these are some of the issues with the 17 sustainable goals, but at the same point of time, this gives us a direction, it gives our overall framework towards which our entire society should strive for. Now, how we can implement these sustainable development goals in the ULB, because in this particular course we are mostly focusing on what are the services that has to be provided in urban areas or particularly provided by the ULBs. So how we can implement these sustainable development goals or even the duties and responsibilities in the 12th schedule, that is of primary concern here. Now, first of all, we have to the sustainable development goals are listed for all countries of the world, but that doesn't mean that every country has to adopt that in exactly the same way that has been stated. As per each country's context, as per each country's setup, as per each country's constitution, laws and development agenda, of course there has to be localization of these particular goals. So that means exactly how we are going to implement or achieve these particular targets, that has to be designed by each country as per their own context. So ULBs can definitely synchronize their development plans along with the sustainable development goals and all. Of course, ULBs had their own plan, but now because as a country we have adopted the sustainable development goals, our ULBs should also adopt the same in their development programs and development agenda. Now, lot of central and state sponsored schemes are there, which actually we will discuss that in the subsequent lecture. So those central and state sponsored schemes, maybe the scheme is in regards to life insurance, the scheme is in regards to provision of certain skill education or provision of certain educational institutions. All these are this can be aligned and utilized to meet the goals at the urban level. So that means at the end of the day, ULBs are the ones who are responsible for carrying out these state-sponsored schemes and programs in the urban areas. And so they could be aligned with the sustainable development goals, or maybe the schemes could be also tweaked or changed so that they align with the goals, and eventually they would be implemented at the ULB level, by the ULB of course. So in addition to that, to meet the sustainable development goals, we can also design new schemes so that we can, like for example, there is a goal for no poverty. So maybe some new schemes can come up which can make sure that there is extreme poverty could be eradicated. or like for example, like certain vulnerable groups or certain kinds of like for example elderly population in the urban area, can we come up with some new schemes for their improvement. So these are some new schemes can be also designed in addition to the existing running schemes of the government. Then what we can do is the indicators that are used to measure each of these targets, we can also set these targets at the ULB level, maybe at the ward level, and we can measure how we are improving each area of the particular urban area for the city or that particular urban area or each zone of that particular city, so that we can see that yes, we are able to make some changes in the ground. And these targets can be measured using indicators, so we can measure these targets at the zone level and using this indicator. So this kind of setup also needs to be considered. So we can create several indexes which could help us in measuring certain outcomes. And indicators should also explore and cover vertical and horizontal linkages between the different goals or targets and so on. Then convergences, or where different goals and targets merge. That means, as we say, that skill development is a necessity which will ensure not only economic development but also removal of poverty or eradication of poverty or even hunger. Then resource mobilization and implementable actions by the ULBs. That means what exactly the ULBs can be doing to achieve these particular targets or to reach those targets, that has to be explored. So now if I try to align the sustainable development goals with the 12th schedule of the Constitution, we can see that of course it cannot be exactly aligned, but there are some overlaps, some also in some cases they are not exactly the same thing, but still we can do some sort of alignment. For example, the sustainable development goal number 1 and 2, like no poverty and zero hunger, could be brought under urban poverty alleviation programs, or this kind of agenda which had been put in the 12th schedule, or this kind of responsibilities that are listed in the 12th schedule. Similarly, quality education, it can be aligned with promotion of cultural, educational and aesthetic aspects. Of course, education itself should include the teachings or so that culture can be imbibed in the people, or we can promote cultural, we can promote cultural, the cultural traditions or the historical, the traditional knowledge systems or the different, the heritage of that particular area, those could be imbibed in the education itself. And similarly, the education is not only about technical things, it can consider also the aesthetic aspects, the overall design part. So all this could be brought under the educational domain as well. Then when we talk about gender equality, SDG goal only talks about gender equality, but in our constitution, it talks about safeguarding interest of weaker sections of society. Of course, that includes the women, that includes the elderly, that includes the children, and it also includes handicapped and mentally retarded or maybe disabled people as well. So you can see that more or less the goals from the responsibilities and the goals align to a certain extent. Then good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, these are SDG goals 3 and 6. This could be aligned with water supply for domestic, industrial, commercial purposes, public health, sanitation and solid waste management, vital statistics including registration of births and deaths. So these goals could be aligned with this. Maybe this vital statistics is a part of health, of course, and health and sanitation, health and public health engineering go hand in hand. So overall, this is part of these two particular goals. So we have already discussed health services in our earlier module. So you have seen that we have discussed that having a clean area or a provision of proper water supply, this actually improves the overall health of an urban area. Then finally, coming to planning for economic and social development, this is the 12th schedule responsibility, whereas this could be aligned with several SDG goals. For example, SDG 10, reduced inequality, SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, as well as SDG 7 can be also aligned to a certain extent, like affordable and clean energy, because energy is a prerequisite for any kind of economic development, and also we spend a lot of investment in energy, or we spend a lot in energy, so that and that actually contributes to economic growth. So anyway, but primarily these are the 3 SDG goals which are aligned with economic and social development. Then SDG 11 talks about sustainable cities and communities, and as you can see, because we are talking about ULB responsibilities, so we have several responsibilities which are aligned with achievement of sustainable cities and communities. In addition, there are several other goals like SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. So we have already discussed that this kind of goals are not individual goals. These goals could be adopted in every stages, like in city planning, where we have talked about solid waste management. We have to do proper. If we do responsible consumption and production, automatically our solid waste management could be done in a much better way, or we will not generate so much amount of waste. Similarly, climate action, these are also aligned. These are general goals like below, conservation of the environment, water as well as land. So these are general goals which could be adopted in different aspects of designing sustainable cities and communities, particularly in the ULB's context. But if I talk about the overall country's context, there may be other aspects which is not covered in the 12th schedule. Then peace, justice, strong institutions, partnership for the goals. These are again very common goals, which again, whenever we are talking about any sort of development, institutional capacity building or development of the overall awareness of the people, all these are part of that any kind of development process. So that is how we can align the SDGs with the 12th schedule, and primarily we would be focusing on this part, which is we would look into planning for economic and social development. We will be looking into safeguarding interests of the vulnerable people. We will be looking into the educational aspects and also the urban poverty alleviation in this particular module. So these are some of the references you can study.